Hi, this is Dan Bullard, retired electronics engineer, sitting on the front deck of my houseboat. Oh, it's a cold day. I want to talk real quick about, that thing I did on QSpice. That was really wild because I couldn't believe my luck in finding that thing. I showed you that the amplitude of the fundamental was 1.0 in both the V in and the V out. Well, that's 1.0 for doing THD and stuff, so they just normalize whatever the V out is. But that's a mistake. That's a big mistake. And I remember very clearly making exactly the same mistake in my Excel spreadsheets and in other measurements, because I've written THD functions all over the world and I've done this stuff for years. And I was talking to my buddy David Reynolds, and I said, well, thank God harmonics don't remove anything from the fundamental. He's like, yeah, they do. I'm like, no, you're wrong, David. He says, yeah, you're normalizing, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. Well, there you go. They do remove amplitude from the fundamental. The harmonics take energy away from the fundamental, because harmonics don't just come out of nothing. It's not like magical energy gets created out of thin air. The harmonics come from the fundamental. That's where they come from. And I can show you a bunch of different things where that happens. But it's really tricky. You have to read the book, don't wait for the movie. In distortion and in harmonics, I show you that. And in the case of a square wave, if you think about a square wave, that's a really crazy example, because in a square wave, you take a 1 billion volt peak-to-peak sine wave and you chop it down to 1 volt peak-to-peak. And now you have 0.5 volts going up and it's flat, and 0.5 volts going down and it's flat. And the fundamental is gigantic in that case. You've chopped away some of it, but the fundamental goes up. And when I first wrote distortion, I did all these things and I put it out there, and I showed the square wave fundamental at 0 dB. Then I published the book. Then I did some more experiments and I found out, oh, wait a minute. Excel cheats you, because I set the graphs to go from 0 dB to minus 100 dB. So because I set it to 0 dB, I didn't realize that the fundamental actually went above 0 dB. It went up to 2.1 dB. So I didn't get to see it in the graphs. So then I'm like, oh no, I've published these books. I've got it out there at 0 dB for the fundamental. That's not the case. The fundamental is not 0 dB, it's 2.1 dB. It's actually bigger than I thought it was. So then I had to go in and tweak the graphic and repost the book. So that takes like an additional 3 days. You cancel the book, you repost the graphics and everything, and then republish it, and 3 days later you get reprinted. So I didn't do that a lot on distortion. I did a few of them like that, but that was a biggie. I didn't realize the fundamental is not always constant. And so this case in QSpice, they show the fundamental at 1.0 in both the V in and the V out. But that's not true. That's not true. The graphic clearly shows you that the V out is gained up from V in. But not only that, there are harmonics created, and the harmonics steal energy from the fundamental. So the fundamental is actually smaller than it should be. And that's like very, very, very hard to figure out, especially with a spectrum analyzer. Because what does a spectrum analyzer do? It automatically assumes the fundamental is the biggest signal. So it just calls that 0 dB. So these people who do these things like QSpice and people who use spectrum analyzers, they don't have a clue that this is happening. And so in their mind, harmonics come from nothing. It's energy created out of thin air. But you supposedly could go in, rectify it, and get that harmonic energy and use it for free. It's free energy. But there's no such thing. There's no such thing as free energy. Okay, another thing that's really been getting me. Every harmonic has only one job to do. Create distortion on either side of 90 degrees or on either side of 270 degrees. That's it. That's all the harmonic is there to do. Each harmonic is individually responsible for doing that. Now, the interesting thing is, what are the harmonics? They're multiples of the fundamental. What's the wavelength of the harmonic? It's the fundamental wavelength divided by the harmonic number. So the wavelength of each harmonic goes down. Each harmonic has less wavelength. Now, that means it has less area, doesn't it? Remember that most of the things that the harmonic does is basically to cover its tracks. That's really what harmonics are there for. They're to cover their tracks. So the harmonic is there to create the distortion and then be invisible for the rest of the wave. So those harmonics are there for the whole wave. If you look at a Bullard plot, and that's really how things work, those harmonics are there for the entire duration of the wave. But they're there for just one little portion of the fundamental. To distort the wave in front of 90 degrees or behind 90 degrees or in front of 270 degrees and behind 270 degrees. So those harmonics generally are there without, they're not doing anything. There's nothing going on. That's why they cover their tracks. And that's why if you inhibit the higher harmonics, you see these weird things show up. As the frequency goes up, the area for each harmonic goes down because it only applies to one cycle of the wave. And it's really hard to wrap your head around this. It's really hard. The harmonic only has to be there for 2 cycles, even though it's there for the whole thing. The cycle where it creates the distortion before 90 or after 90. Or the distortion happens before 270 and after 270. So that's the only time that those areas come into play. The rest of the time, the harmonics are there to cover their tracks. They're invisible. They're there for the whole cycle of the wave, but they're invisible because the God of harmonics has deemed it, and I'm not the God of harmonics, but the God of harmonics has determined how that distortion is going to be created. And most of the wave is just leave everything alone. But the problem is the harmonics get energy from the fundamental, so the fundamental goes down. It decreases in amplitude, but they don't show you that because the spectrum analyzer shows you the fundamental as 0 dB. So you might be thinking that the waveform is being decreased in amplitude by the amplifier not being true to its real nature. But that only happens if you distort the wave. If you distort the wave, the amplitude of the harmonic has to take energy from the fundamental. It doesn't have a choice. Where else is it going to get the energy? You know, there's no federal program to create energy for harmonics. Harmonics come from the energy in the fundamental. And I told you that before. Area is volt seconds or amp seconds if you want to deal in current, but there's no such thing as current harmonics causing voltage harmonics. That's a load of shit. So you could call it energy, except it's not measured in joules. So it is energy, but you don't know what the current is in most cases because you're normally dealing in voltage. But you can't say it's in joules because joules is volts times current times time. And so you can't talk about it in joules. It's volt seconds or amp seconds. And I learned that when I was doing glitch energy on the next test. So these guys, I'm telling you, these guys who do this stuff are really stupid. I did a post on everything RF, and those guys still haven't approved my post. They're trying to ask about harmonics and spurious harmonics. So I ain't saying I'm brilliant, but my discovery of harmonics is one of the greatest discoveries in physics. One of the greatest. And I'm not being recognized for it. They're going to wait until I'm dead and go, oh, that Bullard guy, he kind of knew something. Too bad he's dead. But that's the way it is. Anyway, that's enough for now. So once again, from the river, this is Dan Bullard. See ya.